Today's topic is all about ellipses. Don't know what these are? Well, if you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips to help you use these really useful little punctuation points. Now, every writer knows that punctuation makes a difference. Punctuation errors can be simply annoying to readers and editors who find it jarring when you don't use the right punctuation, but they can also mix up your message. Who could forget some of these big mistakes that people have made in punctuation? Remember this one? Let's eat grandma, or let's eat grandma. Or how about, I'm sorry I love you, or I'm sorry I love you. You get the picture. Punctuation makes all the difference. Today I want to focus on a much abused punctuation mark. It's the ellipsis, or ellipsis points as I was taught many years ago. But let's stick to the simple, ellipsis, or plural ellipses. But before I get to my tips, let's make sure that you know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, here it is. Yep. It is 3 dots. That's all. It's those 3 dots that you've seen in various places, but do you really know what they're supposed to do for your writing? In general, using these little 3 dots means that something has been omitted or it's a little placeholder. That's not exactly the only way that you can use them. So here are my 5 tips for using ellipses. Tip number 1, use an ellipsis to indicate a thought that has trailed off. This is one way that ellipses can be used in informal writing, and this is particularly useful when it comes to dialogue. Look at this example. Have you ever wondered, I wasn't sure I really wanted to ask? You can see that in that example, the speaker's thought trailed off, and they didn't finish the thought. That's an appropriate place for ellipsis. And remember that the quotation marks go outside the punctuation. But that's not to be confused with a piece of dialogue that comes to an abrupt end because the speaker is interrupted. Here's an example of that. Have you ever wondered? Susan cut me off before I could finish my thought. And of course, as you can see in that case, it has to end with an M dash. And I've talked about M dashes before. Tip number 2. Use an ellipsis to indicate a pause. Again, this is in informal writing, not in your academic essays or something very formal that you have to submit to someone. Here's an example. Have you ever wondered? I mean, really wondered. Clearly, you can see that the writer wanted you to know that the speaker paused. It's a beat. Tip number 3, use an ellipsis to indicate that you've omitted some material in a quote. And this can be at the beginning of the sentence of a quote, or it can be in the middle. Here's an example. Patricia Parsons wrote, when the deadline is imposed by an external force, those deadlines take on even greater importance. In that quote, you can see that the very beginning of the sentence was left out and there was something omitted in between those 2 pieces. And that's a legitimate way to quote something when there are 2 pieces that are something in the middle that you don't necessarily need to include. Tip number 4, know the conventions of spacing. What I'm talking about is how much spacing there is to be between the little 3 dots and before the ellipsis and after the ellipsis. Well, before the ellipsis and after the ellipsis, you generally don't put a space, but the space between the dots varies. If you're writing something formal, for example, an article for a journal or an essay for college or university, you'll be assigned some kind of a style guide. That style guide could be MLA. That style guide could be the Chicago Manual of Style. It could be the APA style guide. All of these have specific conventions for how to punctuate and how to space. And in these formal ones, there is a space between each of the dots. However, in informal writing and news writing, if you're writing a non-fiction trade book or a novel, you will use no spacing. You will do dot, 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 no spaces. Make sure you get it right. Tip number 5, don't overuse ellipses. Too many of these little dot, dot, dots can make readers and editors a little bit cross-eyed. They're actually very useful for making a point, but if every time you have dialogue you use ellipses for beats and you don't allow the reader to actually contribute in his or her own mind to where the beats might be, it can become very annoying and very difficult to read the dialogue. So be very careful about not overusing them in either dialogue or in descriptive prose. Well, that's it for my 5 tips about ellipses. Let's all go have a look and edit our material and see if we could add a few or take a few away. Talk to you next time. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat, and maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.